All right, today we're going to look at shifting the sine and cosine graphs left or right or up or down. The very first thing that we look at, though, is just the parent functions of sine or cosine, remembering that cosine for the parent function will start at 1, whereas the sine starts at the origin, right? Positive cosine starts above, starts by going down. A positive sine starts in the middle, starts by going up. Okay. The general formula for translating is y equals a sine b times x minus h plus k, or just replace that with a cosine. And just like all of the parent functions, h and k do what they've always done. H is my shifts left and right, and k is up and down. So what does the absolute value of a represent? Yeah, that's the amplitude. Okay, and then the period is found by taking 2 pi and dividing that by b. The increment, this still review, is just the period over 4. Or you could say the period times 1/4. Same thing. Okay, now we're on to the new stuff, this h. The h is the shift left or right.
Is it the opposite of, like, you know what I mean? Negative or positive? Like it is with the other stuff.
So notice that since it's x minus h, that minus causes it to do the opposite thing. Like if you end up with like a minus 3, that means shift right 3, right? Okay. The k. I'm gonna have to switch colors because you can't really see that blue. The k is the shift up or down. And what's important about k is our midline. Okay, so we have a midline at y equals k. So it used to just be the x-axis. That used to be the middle of our graphs. Now this k will be the middle of our graphs. So since we're shifting this thing up and down, our maximums and minimums change from just being the amplitude to k plus a for the maximum and k minus a for the minimum. Okay, some important things whenever you're graphing. If there is an h, you need 5 values. So you'll start at your h and you'll add the I 4 times. So yeah, your very first one will be h, and you'll just add I to get the rest of them. If you have a k, or even if you don't have a k, the midline 0, start by graphing the midline with a horizontal dashed line, and then for the maximum you just add or subtract a, just like what we just said. Always factor out b when there's a number next to the x inside of the parentheses. Okay, sine starts at hk, cosine will start at either hk plus a or k minus a. The very first example that we're going to look at is y equals negative 3 cosine of x minus 2. So let's think about the transformations that happened here. Is there an h inside the parentheses? No. So is there any shift left or right? No. There is a minus 2. What is that minus 2 going to do? It's going to go down 2. So I'm going to have a midline where? Yeah, I'm going to have a midline at y equals negative 2. All right. So let's just start going through it. What's the amplitude? 3. Okay. What's b? What number is in front of that x? 1. Right. So to find the period, it's just 2 pi over 1. So 2 pi. and the increment would be 2 pi over 4. So that's pi over 2. All right, before we get to drawing anything else, I'm going to go ahead and label my x-axis and then figure out where my midline is. Okay, so I'm always going to start by just drawing an x-axis, my h, and then adding my increments to it. So here's my x-axis, which I wanted to be black. Okay, what was the h? Since there's no shift left or right, the very first point is 0. Well, at 0, there's another axis. So, okay, now I need to get 4 more spots.
Is this the x-axis or are we at?
Okay, so the distance from my starting point to my ending point needs to be 2 pi, because that's the period. Okay, since there was no shift left or right, the last point should be 2 pi. But let's just add the increments of pi over 2. 0 plus pi over 2 is pi over 2. Plus another pi over 2 would be pi. Then 3 pi over 2, 2 pi. Remember that you could always just be down here going, okay, 1 pi over 2, 2 pi over 2, 3 pi over 2, 4 pi over 2, and so on, and then just go back and erase the non-simplified versions. Okay, so I've got my increment set up from my h. Now it's time to draw my midline. My midline is at y equals negative 2. So here's negative 2, and I'm going to draw my midline. This is going to act as my new x-axis because I shifted down 2. Now if the amplitude is 3, and my midline is negative 2, how high can it go? I can go up 3 from negative 2 to be at 1. Or I can go down 3 from negative 2 to be at negative 5. Okay, so the max and min values are just found by adding your amplitude to the k. So my maximum value is 1, and my minimum value is negative 5. Okay, now I notice that it's negative 3 cosine. So my starting point, I'm just going to label it SP. It always starts at h. Remember, h was 0. And since it's a negative cosine, I start at k minus a. So negative 2 minus 3 was negative 5. But really, once you have this midline and your other points, you could just really start by just graphing that and then labeling that point. So since it's a negative cosine, I know it needs to start below the line. And then I'm going to hit, I just complete the cosine function by treating the midline as my x-axis. So my next point is pi over 2, negative 2. Up here to 1. And back down. And there's my cosine function. Alright, now our next example is y equals 1/2 sine times pi, x plus pi. So, unlike the last problem, this one doesn't shift up or down, right? Because there's no k.
Yeah.
What does this one do? It goes left or right because of that pi. So, this pi gives me an h of negative pi. So it's going to shift left pi. Now, we always start, we have our x-axis. We know that our first point on the x-axis is pi, or whatever h is, so in our case negative pi. Then we're going to add our increment to it. So let's figure out the increment. What's my amplitude first off? 1/2. Okay, what's b? B is, if there's nothing written right there, it's just a 1. So there I drew a 1. So the period is going to be 2 pi divided by 1, so 2 pi, with an increment, just like last time. 2 pi over 4 is pi over 2. All right. So let me start with that. I'm going to start with my h. I know I shifted left pi. And I'm going to need 4 marks. 2, 3, 4. Now if I'm going to be adding I to that h, I need a common denominator, right? Like negative pi in terms of pi over 2. That would just be negative 2 pi over 2, right? So I'm going to add pi over 2 to that. That would give me negative 1 pi over 2. Then 0, 1 pi over 2, 2 pi over 2. So the only ones that reduce are the negative 2 pi over 2 and the 2 pi over 2. So I have negative pi over 2, 0, pi over 2, pi. Then I go back and I erase the ones that weren't simplified. So I had 0, that's a y-axis. The midline is still 0, right? Because we didn't shift up or down. How high up and down does this thing go? What's the amplitude again? 1/2. So that 1/2 is just going to be added to 0 and taken away from 0. So 1/2, negative 1/2. Okay, so that half and negative 1/2, those are my max and min. So the max is 1/2, the min is negative 1/2. Now the starting point, sine always starts on the midline. So this is going to start on 0. No, I'm sorry. That's the y coordinate. It always starts at h though. So negative pi and the height of 0. So it always starts at hk. Okay, so now we have everything that we need to be able to graph this. Since it's sine, it starts on the midline at our furthest left point, which is h. Which way are we going to go first, up or down? We're going to go up. Why? Because it's a positive 1/2 sine. So go up first. That's at the top of my graph. So now I go down. Keep going down to the bottom of my graph and start coming back up. This is one period because I have one arch on top, one arch on bottom. And that's the sine graph. Alright, in this last example, y equals negative sine times 1/3 x plus pi over 6 plus 2. We have quite a doozy here, right? We have h, k, and we have to factor out our b. I'm not starting over. Doozy is a real word, okay? I'm from Houston. So, got a whopper of a problem right here. Negative sine. I'm going to factor out this 1/3. So 1/3, that means that you have to divide everything inside by 1/3. So pi over 6 divided by 1/3, or pi over 6 times 3, is pi over 2. Okay, so the first thing that I notice is that this graph is going to shift which way, left or right? This graph is going to shift left because my h is equal to negative pi over 2. Okay? Now to figure out my increment, I have to go, okay, b is equal to a third. So the period is 2 pi divided by 3, or divided by a third, which is times 3 over 1. So the period is 6 pi. And the increment would be that 6 pi divided by 4. So 3 pi over 2. So I'm going to start by graphing the x-axis only. Okay. I'm going to mark my h, negative pi over 2, and then make 4 equal marks from that. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, they're beautifully
I
equal.
believe all numbers are
So now I take that h, negative pi over 2, and I add 3 pi over 2 to that. What's negative pi over 2 plus 3 pi over 2? 2 pi over 2 plus another 3 pi over 2? 5 pi over 2, 8 pi over 2, 11 pi over 2. And then I just go back and reduce the ones that I can. It'd be pi. 5 pi over 2 doesn't reduce. 4 pi. And 11 pi over 2 doesn't reduce. Erase the ones that weren't reduced. Alright, now I need to figure out where the y-axis is. I know that the y-axis is between negative pi over 2 and pi. Which one of those is a little bit closer to 0? Negative pi over 2 or pi? Negative pi over 2. So that's my 0. Where's the midline? So this graph shifted up 2. So here's 2. Actually, I'm going to back that 2. I'm going to put it right there. Because this midline is going to go all the way through this 2. Okay, now what was the amplitude, which we didn't list earlier?
1.
The amplitude is 1, because it's a negative sine x, so that's negative 1 sine x. The absolute value would be 1. So adding that a to the k, what's the maximum value? 2 plus 1 is 3, and the minimum? 1. So I need to make those marks. 3, 1. Okay, since it's sine, it's always going to start, my starting point, it's always just hk. We don't need to add the a to anything. So h was negative pi over 2. K was 2. Okay, so I start right here. I'm starting on the midline because it's sine. I start at h because it was shifted left pi over 2. And now I just go through the function, going to my max and mins. So, up or down first? Down. Now, this is where it's very tempting to hit that axis, right? But the first point, if I'm counting my increment, I should hit over here, pi. So going down first, I hit at pi 1. Then my next point is 5 pi over 2, go back to the midline. At 4 pi, I'll go up to 3. And 11 pi over 2, I go back to the midline. Whoa. Missed pretty poorly there. Okay. And there's the sine function. Shifted up 2 and left pi over 2. That's all.